I'd like to talk about 3 critical mistakes I've made in avoiding necessary conversations. Sharing those with you, hopefully to help you have some of the conversations that you need. Understanding the importance of some of the things that happen in our lives and needing to address them. The first of which is assuming that the problem will fix itself. I would say never. I try not to use absolutes, but I would say that a problem will very rarely fix itself. But oftentimes, I think that we don't want to address or have what might be an uncomfortable conversation, so we avoid it. And we think, well, maybe this will fix itself. Maybe this behavior will stop. Maybe they'll start meeting my expectations or start respecting my boundaries. And this is very seldom the case. It incredibly rarely will the problem just kind of correct itself. You have to take the action in order to reset expectations or to firm up and make sure that the boundary is clear, or to even just help someone else understand the impact that they're having on you, because oftentimes they're unaware of that. We could be so obsessed with ourselves in maybe not even a self-centered way, but just because we are the center of our own universe, that we don't necessarily understand the impact that we have on others. So you taking the responsibility to help show somebody that impact, it can be very innocent and doesn't require any conflict, and it might not even really require any discomfort. But you need to understand that the problem will definitely not fix itself. Most likely, I guess. Very, very unlikely that it would ever fix itself. And oftentimes when we do that, what we can do is lead right into the critical mistake, the second critical mistake. And that would be to kind of try to say it in a very indirect and potentially passive and likely passive aggressive way. This is where we'll allude to a problem or allude to some of the frustrations or emotions that we might be feeling due to someone else's behavior without really directly addressing it and without any clarity that helps the other person understand where you're coming from. Ultimately, this for you generally would likely feel like an attack. If you've ever felt this yourself, I think you would understand the way that you can make somebody else feel by failing to address issues directly with someone and clearly communicating the expectations or communicating the way that you feel about an issue and what the problem is from your point of view. Ultimately, what it is trying to solve this in a very conflict-averse way. I think that we tend to assume that there will be a conflict when we have to have conversations that make us sensitive or is about a sensitive issue, or maybe we might feel embarrassed that we feel a certain way. And really that is something that we need to get over. So that way we can ultimately have a clear conversation with somebody that we likely care about, or somebody that's important to achieving a goal, or somebody that's important to us, and not just avoid it and ultimately let the problem persist until the point it becomes silent resentment, which is really the worst outcome that could possibly happen. And this happens a lot of times when we're avoiding the action that we need to take in the conversation that we need to have. And lastly, when we head into these difficult questions, I think we tend to make a critical mistake is adding our emotions into the pot. While it might be addressing a failed expectation or disappointing behavior on the other person's part, it doesn't help us at all to have to address it and add our emotions into it. So I highly recommend keeping your emotions in check or not adding to it as best as possible. It's about being clear and about addressing the issue and not really feeling the emotions in the moment or necessarily making them feel bad for how they made you feel. This isn't the goal. The goal is to ultimately make it clear the impact that they're having on you and ultimately try to work through the issue towards a resolution. So that way it's no longer an issue. So there's no failed expectations and there's no disappointment or frustration down the road, or there's no hurt. Depending upon whatever the situation may be, these are the outcomes that we need to think about. And delivering some feedback that might be difficult for the other person to hear, because oftentimes it's probably not the behavior or what they intend. If we assume positive intent on their side, we should assume that it might be difficult for them to hear. And that's great. Having the level of empathy to understand that the feedback might be difficult. It might cause emotions on their end as well. Trying to stay in a safe place in which you can understand their emotions without adding additional emotions into the mix is incredibly important. If you think about it, their emotions might fill up the space that's available, and really trying to manage those from an external view without adding yours in and making this explosive cocktail of emotions is incredibly important. It might be a high emotional situation. That doesn't mean that the emotions need to be present in this situation. So that's generally taking the time to, one, settle down when you need to when you have a difficult conversation to have, and making sure you're in the right headspace, but also really just erring towards clarity and trying to get relative to the topic. One of my favorite pieces, one of my favorite metaphors for understanding the best way to work through issues with someone else is, a lot of times if you think about it, it's you on one side of a table, the problem in the middle, and someone else on the other side. A very useful perspective for me, or useful framework that helps me to address difficult conversations, is to try to get on the same side as the person you're discussing with, on the audience, if you will. If you guys are on the same side and you're working against the problem, like, that's a very collaborative effort, instead of it being almost competitive, being across from each other, or adversarial is probably the better word. You don't want an adversarial or conflicting relationship when you're trying to address something that's very impactful or important, whether it be a failed expectation, failed boundary, or a disrespected boundary, or a disappointing behavior, or just something that really kind of hurt you. In all of these senses, it's important to understand that you're really just trying to save and improve the relationship. And ultimately, you guys might be working towards the same goal. And clarifying that and getting on the same side of the issue and trying to understand one another is the most important thing to be doing, and the most important thing to try to make clear. Sometimes this can be very difficult to get through, but we need to remember, wherever possible, try to keep your emotions in check, so that way you can help regulate their emotions when they're receiving feedback that they might not have been prepared for, or might be difficult for them to take in the moment. So again, just wrapping that up, just hitting them quickly, the 3 critical mistakes that I've made in the past relative to avoiding necessary conversations or actions that I need to take to improve relationships and really address negative or poor behavior or disappointing behavior, failed expectations, disrespected boundaries. It's assuming the problem will fix itself. It never will. Unspoken expectations are future resentments. Passively or indirectly, or maybe even passive-aggressively trying to address the issue, it lacks clarity, and ultimately you need clarity and understanding in order to be able to make any progress. And lastly, adding emotions, allowing your emotions to be added into the mix whenever you're having a difficult conversation. It is going to become more volatile if you have 2 full sets of emotions into a situation. So really try to put them in check and bring your perspective to the table, but not your emotions. So I hope this helps. Again, that is just 3 critical mistakes that I've made in the past. And that ultimately, since addressing them and kind of approaching them from a different perspective with some useful tools and useful perspectives, I've had a lot more success. So I hope that works for you. You can't lose if you don't quit.